They poured wine on an omega for fun. Unaware her mate is the Alpha King, the city of Velorin gleamed under the pale light of a rising moon, its golden towers catching the last rays of sunset. Lanterns hung from every balcony, and the streets were alive with music, laughter, and whispers. Tonight was the Harvest Masquerade, the grandest festival of the year, where nobles, merchants, and supernatural beings mingled freely, each eager to display their wealth, power, or charm. The air smelled of roasted fruits, spiced wine, and burning candles, mixing into a heady perfume that made the city seem alive, almost breathing. In the middle of this bustling scene walked Lyra, a young Omega whose presence was barely noticed among the glittering masks and elaborate gowns. She had always been careful, quiet, and measured, but tonight, the excitement of the festival had pulled her out of her small room in the Eastern District. Her soft blue eyes scanned the crowd, wide with both wonder and fear. Every glance felt heavy, as if everyone were measuring her worth, and she could not stop thinking about the stories she had heard of other Omegas being mocked, dismissed, or worse. Despite her anxiety, Lyra carried herself with a gentle dignity. Her gown, pale as moonlight, swayed with each step, catching the glimmer of lanterns. A delicate silver chain rested around her neck, a gift from her late mother, and she held it tightly in her hand whenever her nerves threatened to overwhelm her. Deep down, she longed for acceptance, for someone to see her worth beyond her status as an Omega, but the world had not yet given her that chance. She was barely inside the festival square when a group of young nobles noticed her. They laughed quietly among themselves, their eyes sharp and cruel. One of them, a tall man with a cruel smile, whispered something, and before she could react, red wine spilled over her gown. The liquid spread quickly, dark and warm against the soft fabric, and the crowd nearby gasped at the spectacle. Lyra froze. Her cheeks burned with shame and anger. She had tried to move away, but the nobles surrounded her, laughing openly, their voices loud and mocking. "Careful, little Omega," one of them jeered. "Don't ruin our festival with your clumsy steps." Another added, "Perhaps we should teach her how to dance without tripping." Their amusement was sharp, cutting through the cheerful music of the festival like a knife. Lyra's heart pounded. Her hands shook as she tried to wipe the wine from her gown, but it had soaked in too quickly. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back fiercely. She was used to being underestimated, to being treated as if she were fragile or invisible, but this public humiliation was almost unbearable. She wanted to run, to vanish into the shadows, but the crowd was thick, and there seemed to be no escape. Then, as if the world itself had shifted, a silence fell. The laughter of the nobles faded into nothingness, replaced by a presence that seemed to command the air around it. Lyra felt a chill crawl down her spine, and when she looked up, she saw him. King Kale, the Alpha King of Velorin, stood on the balcony above, watching. His robes were dark, flowing like liquid night, and his eyes, sharp and piercing, held a mixture of curiosity, recognition, and something far deeper that Lyra could not yet understand. The nobles froze under his gaze, suddenly aware of the enormity of the moment. Kale's reputation preceded him. He was known as a king who ruled with unmatched strength, cunning, and an almost terrifying presence. Tales spoke of his battles with rival kingdoms, his command over supernatural forces, and his unyielding sense of justice. But now, standing before her, the story seemed small compared to the raw power radiating from him. Without a word, Kale descended from the balcony. His steps were silent, almost predatory but graceful, and with each movement the crowd parted instinctively. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She could not tell whether she feared him, admired him, or felt something else entirely. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her stomach twist in a strange mixture of dread and fascination. When he reached her, he knelt slightly, his presence towering yet protective. "Lyra," he said, his voice low and commanding, carrying a weight that made the nobles hesitate, "stand." The name itself was foreign on his lips, yet it resonated deep within her. How did he know her name? How could he have seen her in the crowd without being told? She tried to answer, but no sound came. The world had narrowed to just the two of them, the Alpha King and the Omega, a connection invisible to all but them. Kale's hand reached toward hers, gentle but firm, lifting her from the floor. The warmth of his touch was unlike anything she had ever felt, and for the first time, Lyra felt seen, truly seen. The nobles who had mocked her now cowered, and whispers of shock and fear rippled through the festival. "They will pay," Kale said, his voice a whisper meant only for her. "But first, you must understand who you truly are." Lyra's heart raced, confusion and wonder swirling inside her. She wanted to ask questions, to run, to scream, but the weight of his presence anchored her in place. She felt something awakening inside her, a strange awareness that she was more than just the meek Omega the world believed her to be. The crowd slowly realized the magnitude of the moment. Noble after noble bowed, some out of fear, others out of respect, but all were silent. For the first time, Lyra noticed the way the air seemed to bend slightly around Kale, as if he were more than human, as if the very night acknowledged his command. Kale's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity never left his eyes. "Do not fear them," he said, referring to the nobles, "and do not fear yourself. Your path is not what they imagine. Your destiny is different." Lyra wanted to ask what he meant, but again, no words came. She only nodded slightly, feeling a shiver of anticipation. It was as if the world itself had shifted, and for the first time in her life, she was at the center of something greater than herself. The nobles, humiliated and afraid, began to retreat, whispering among themselves. Some cursed under their breath, others avoided even looking at her, and one or two dared to glance at Kale, only to lower their eyes in shame. Lyra realized, with a mix of relief and awe, that she was no longer the powerless girl they had mocked. As the festival resumed, albeit more subdued, Lyra and Kale walked together through the crowd. Every step felt weighted with unspoken meaning. Kale's presence was protective, yet there was a tension between them that neither could fully understand. It was as if a thread, invisible and fragile, connected their fates, drawing them closer even as the world tried to pull them apart. They reached a quiet corner of the festival, away from the laughter and music. Lanterns swayed in the gentle breeze, casting flickering shadows on their faces. Kale stopped, turning to her fully. "You have strength," he said softly, "though you may not see it yet, and soon you will need it." Lyra's chest tightened. His words were both a warning and a promise. She wanted to ask what he meant, to demand answers, but instead, she simply nodded, feeling the weight of their shared destiny pressing against her heart. A sudden rustle of silk drew her attention. The nobles who had mocked her were gone, replaced by a figure watching from a distance, a messenger perhaps or a spy. Lyra felt a twinge of fear, but Kale's hand on her steadied her. His eyes met hers, full of command and care, and she knew, without needing to speak, that she would not face this alone. "You must learn," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to echo in her very bones, "that the world is larger and darker than you imagine, and that you are not as small as you believe." Lyra's mind swirled with questions, fear, and a strange, thrilling anticipation. Something inside her stirred, a sense of purpose she had never felt before. She realized that this night, this moment of humiliation and revelation, had changed everything. Her life would never be the same, and somehow, she knew that whatever came next, it would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. As the first notes of the festival music rose again, Lyra looked up at Kale, her heart beating in a rhythm that matched his presence. I will try," she whispered, though even she was unsure whether she spoke to him, to herself, or to the destiny that now bound them. Kale inclined his head slightly, a hint of a smile touching his lips, a rare softness that did not diminish his authority. "Good," he said. You will need every ounce of courage, Lyra, and soon the world will see that even an Omega can command power beyond imagining." The lanterns swayed, the shadows danced, and the festival continued, but for Lyra nothing felt the same. She had glimpsed a future she could not yet grasp, a life intertwined with a king whose presence both terrified and captivated her. And as the night deepened, she felt it, the pull of something ancient, something unbroken, something that had been waiting for her all along. And then Kale whispered, just for her ears, "We will face them together, but the night is only beginning." Lyra's heart shivered at his words, and as the lanterns flickered in the darkness, she knew one thing for certain. Her life, her destiny, and her very soul had been irrevocably changed by the Alpha King who had claimed her attention, and perhaps her heart, the fortress of King. Kale rose like a shadowed mountain at the edge of the city. Its black stone walls seemed to drink the light of the moon, reflecting only the flicker of torches that lined the winding pathways. As Lyra approached, the enormity of the place pressed against her chest. It was more than a palace. It was a kingdom of whispers, secrets, and old power that had grown in silence for generations. Every carved arch and spiraling staircase seemed alive, humming faintly with the echoes of history, of battles fought and victories won, and of rulers long gone who still lingered in memory. Kale led her through the gates, his hand firm yet gentle around hers. His presence was a weight she had never felt before, comforting yet suffocating in its intensity. Every servant, guard, and advisor they passed bowed deeply, their eyes sliding over Lyra with a mixture of awe and fear. Some glanced at her with curiosity, others with suspicion, for it was no secret that she was the Omega who had caught the attention of the Alpha King. In Velorin, that title alone commanded both respect and envy. Lyra's heart pounded as they entered the main hall, a grand chamber carved from obsidian and gold. The vaulted ceilings were painted with murals depicting legendary battles and the rise of Velorin's first kings. Candles floated magically in the air, casting dancing shadows across the polished floors. She had never seen anything like it, and yet the beauty and power around her only heightened her anxiety. She felt small, fragile, an outsider among the grandeur. Kale guided her to a seat at the far end of the hall, a place that was neither throne nor common chair, but something in between, meant for someone important yet untested. Lyra lowered herself cautiously, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. She could feel the eyes of the court upon her, weighing her, judging her, and she wondered if she could ever live up to the expectations they whispered about in shadows. "You are not here to be admired," Kale said, his voice low but carrying easily through the hall. "Nor are you here to fear them, you are here to learn." Lyra looked up at him, searching his eyes for clarity. "Learn what?" she asked softly, though her voice wavered. "The truth," he said simply, and there was no mockery in his tone, only weight. "The truth of who you are and what power you carry." For a moment, Lyra was confused. Power. She was an Omega, born gentle and delicate, not someone meant to command or control. And yet the way Kale looked at her, as if he could see through every layer of her being, made her feel that she was more than she had ever imagined. A part of her trembled with fear, another part with anticipation. "You are tied to this kingdom," he continued. "Not by birth, but by destiny. The blood in your veins carries old magic that can awaken the shadows and the light alike. It is dangerous, yes, but it is also necessary, and you must learn to control it." Lyra swallowed hard, the words heavy on her tongue. She had never thought of herself as important, let alone powerful. Her life had been small, predictable, and constrained by the expectations of others. Yet now, standing in the presence of the Alpha King, she realized that the life she had known was only the beginning of something far larger and far more dangerous. The court watched in silence as Kale guided her to a chamber off the main hall, a room lined with books, scrolls, and artifacts glowing faintly with magic. This was the place where he trained those he deemed worthy, a sanctuary of knowledge and power. Here, the outside world could not reach them, though the whispers of intrigue and jealousy still lingered beyond the walls. "This will be your first lesson," Kale said, setting a hand on an ancient tome bound in black leather. "It is not just about magic, Lyra. It is about understanding the world and your place in it. If you cannot control yourself, you cannot control the forces that will come for you." Lyra nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can," he said firmly. "You must. Fear is natural, but it will not serve you. Trust in yourself and trust in me. We are bound, Lyra. Whatever comes, you are not alone." Those words struck her like a chord she had not realized existed. Bound. Not by duty, not by law, but by something older, deeper, and unseen. Her pulse quickened. She did not yet understand what it meant, but she felt the gravity of it settle in her chest. Over the next days, Lyra's training began. At first, it was simple, learning to focus her mind, to feel the flow of energy through her body, to recognize the subtle currents of power in the world around her. Kale guided her patiently, correcting her posture, showing her gestures that seemed small but held immense significance. At times, his touch lingered, brushing her wrist or guiding her hand, and each contact sent a ripple of awareness through her. She could not ignore the flutter in her chest, nor the way her thoughts raced whenever he looked at her with those intense eyes. But the lessons were not only physical or magical. Kale taught her about the court, the politics of Velorin, the delicate balance between loyalty and betrayal. Every noble, advisor, and soldier could be friend or foe, depending on the moment, and a single misstep could bring ruin. Lyra listened, absorbed, and sometimes trembled at the complexity of it all. Yet she began to see patterns, to notice how power flowed, how whispers became plans, and how even the smallest act could ripple across the kingdom. One evening, after hours of training, Kale brought her to the balcony overlooking the city. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the rooftops. Lyra felt the breeze on her face, and for a moment the weight of the fortress and the court fell away. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft. "Why have you chosen me?" Kale's gaze was fixed on the city below, but she felt it pierce her soul. "Because you are not like the others," he said. "You have strength they cannot see, courage they underestimate, and a heart that can endure what most cannot. You are my mate, Lyra. That is not a title I give lightly, nor one I take lightly, and it is not something you can escape." Lyra's chest tightened. The word mate carried weight, an ancient significance she barely understood. She had heard legends, tales of alpha and omega bonds that transcended life and death, yet she had never imagined it could touch her. Fear and longing mingled in her heart, leaving her breathless. "But I'm just me," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not special, I'm small. I don't know anything about power or kings." "You underestimate yourself," Kale said quietly, turning to face her. His eyes softened, but the intensity never left them. "It is not what you are now that matters, but what you choose to become. And I will guide you. But you must also be willing to face yourself, the world, and the dangers that wait." As days turned into weeks, Lyra began to notice changes within herself. Small at first, a flare of awareness, a rush of energy she could not explain. She discovered that when she focused, she could sense the emotions of those nearby, the hidden intentions in their words, the currents of magic in the air. It was thrilling, frightening, and exhausting all at once. Yet, despite her progress, the court remained a place of tension. Some nobles whispered behind her back, envious of her closeness to the king, suspicious of the Omega who had so quickly risen to prominence. Their stares were sharp, their words polite but laced with venom. Lyra felt the sting of judgment constantly, but she began to stand taller, remembering Kale's words. Strength was not only in magic or skill, but in presence, in courage, and in resolve. One night, as the fortress slept, Lyra wandered the halls alone, drawn to a room she had not yet entered. It was quiet, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and candle wax. She opened the door cautiously, revealing a small library filled with books bound in leather, scrolls stacked high, and artifacts that shimmered faintly with latent magic. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, feeling the hum of power beneath her touch. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the corner. Lyra froze. "Who's there?" she whispered. Kale stepped forward, his presence immediately grounding her. "It is only me," he said, a faint smile brushing his lips. "You are curious, and that is good. Curiosity will serve you well, but do not let it consume you. I just want to understand," she said, her voice small but determined. "I want to know why I am different." "You will understand in time," he said, walking closer. But understanding comes not from fear, nor from hiding, but from courage. And sometimes, courage requires facing what you most wish to avoid. Lyra looked at him, feeling a connection she could not explain. There was a tension between them, electric, unspoken, a bond that seemed to pulse in the air around them. And yet, beneath it all, she sensed something deeper: protection, respect, and a strange tenderness she had not expected from a king so feared and revered. "You are ready for more," Kale said after a moment, his voice gentle but commanding. "Tonight, you begin to learn not only how to control your power, but how to understand the hearts of those around you. That is where true strength lies." Lyra nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. The lessons ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous, but she knew one thing: she was no longer the timid Omega she had been when the festival began. She had stepped into a world of shadows and light, of kings and prophecy, and she would face it, not alone, but with the Alpha King by her side. And as the moon rose higher, casting silver light over the fortress, Lyra realized that her life, her destiny, and her very soul had been irrevocably changed. A journey of power, trust, and transformation had begun, and there was no turning back. Yet in the shadows beyond the fortress walls, eyes watched, whispers moved, and plots formed. The nobles who had mocked her were not defeated, and the kingdom's balance of power had begun to tremble. Danger lingered, unseen but palpable, promising that the challenges ahead would test Lyra, Kale, and the bond that had begun to grow between them. And as Kale's hand rested briefly on hers, warm and steady, Lyra felt a thrill of fear and longing. The fortress might protect them for now, but the world outside waited, hungry, impatient, and unyielding. The night was alive with possibility, with power, and with peril. And Lyra knew, deep in her heart, that the story of her life was only just beginning. The wind howled through the moonlit forest, bending the ancient trees with a restless energy. Their twisted branches seemed almost alive, scratching at the mist that clung to the ground. Shadows moved in strange patterns, and the faint whispers of the forest carried old secrets, some of which predated even the kings of Velorin. The forest was beautiful and dangerous all at once, a place where magic and memory lingered in every stone, every leaf, and every sigh of wind. Lyra held Kale's hand tightly as they navigated the narrow path, her fingers trembling with a mixture of fear, excitement, and an unfamiliar sense of power. The journey here had been forced by events beyond their control. A rival kingdom had sent envoys to stir rebellion, using the nobles who had mocked her as pawns in a dangerous game. Their plan had failed, thanks to Kale's swift action, but it had left the fortress tense and restless. The forest offered them temporary safety, a place where they could regroup, train, and prepare for the challenges ahead. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl or the snap of a branch underfoot. Every sound seemed amplified, and Lyra's senses were heightened like never before. She could feel the life pulsing in the forest, the hum of magic in the trees, the faint heartbeat of hidden creatures, and even the subtle shifts in Kale's energy as he moved beside her. She had never been so aware of herself, of the world, or of the invisible thread that connected her to the Alpha King. They reached a small clearing, bathed in silver moonlight. The ground was soft with moss, and a small stream trickled nearby, its water glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Kale stopped, his gaze scanning the shadows around them with the precision of a predator. Lyra could feel the tension in his body, the energy coiled like a spring, and she realized that danger was never far from him, even here in what seemed like a sanctuary. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low but steady. "The forest is alive. It will test you and it will test us." Lyra nodded, her heart pounding. She had grown in strength since arriving at the fortress, learning to channel her magic, to sense the intentions of others, and to understand the flow of power in her world. But the forest was different. It was ancient, raw, and untamed, and she felt both fear and awe as she stood beside the Alpha King who had chosen her. They moved deeper into the clearing, where the air was thick with the scent of moss and the faint tang of magic. Kale stopped again, his eyes narrowing. "We are not alone," he said, and Lyra could feel the tension in his body ripple through her own. A shadow moved between the trees, faster than she could follow with her eyes. Her breath caught as the figure stepped forward, a cursed specter, its form flickering like smoke, its eyes glowing with a pale, cold light. Lyra felt a surge of fear and instinct at once. She raised her hands, focusing on the energy she had been learning to control. Magic flowed through her, trembling but alive, responding to her will. The specter hissed, a sound that seemed to echo in her bones, and lunged toward them with unnatural speed. Kale moved instantly, positioning himself between Lyra and the creature. His strength was unmatched, and yet he did not strike immediately. Instead, he nodded at her, signaling that this battle was also her test. Lyra felt her heart hammer in her chest. Could she do it? Could she channel her power to defend herself and protect the Alpha King who had become so much more than a leader in her life? The specter came closer, and Lyra's magic surged, a bright light that spread from her hands to her chest. She focused on her fear, on her anger at the nobles who had mocked her, on every moment that had made her doubt herself. The energy flowed outward, striking the specter. It recoiled with a shriek that shook the clearing, its form flickering violently. Kale moved beside her, his own power combining with hers. Together, they drove the creature back, pushing it through the shadows until it dissipated into nothingness with a final, echoing wail. Lyra sank to her knees, trembling from the effort and the intensity of the moment. Kale knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You are stronger than you realize," he said softly, his voice steadying her. "This is only the beginning. Your power will grow, but you must trust yourself and me." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes wide. The fear that had gripped her only moments ago was replaced by something else, a fierce sense of purpose, and an understanding that she could not hide from her own potential. Yet beneath the pride and exhilaration, she felt a deep and complicated emotion whenever she looked at Kale: admiration, longing, and something she could not yet name. They spent the night in the clearing, the forest alive with quiet magic around them. Kale taught her how to sense the subtle shifts in energy, how to anticipate threats before they arrived, and how to channel her emotions into control rather than chaos. Each lesson was exhausting, demanding not just strength but courage, resilience, and trust. And throughout it all, their bond deepened. Every shared glance, every touch of a guiding hand, every word carried weight and meaning that Lyra felt in her chest. By dawn, they had returned to the edge of the forest, where the first light painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Lyra's body ached from exertion, but her heart was light, filled with a sense of accomplishment and discovery. She had faced her fear and survived, and for the first time she felt that she was not powerless. Yet the forest had left its mark on her. She could feel the lingering energy of the specter, the echoes of magic that had brushed against her very being. And she could not shake the feeling that more dangers were coming, not just from the rival kingdom, but from forces she did not yet understand. forces that sought to challenge, to control, or even to destroy the bond that was forming between her and the Alpha King. Kale watched her quietly, sensing her thoughts. "You are ready for what comes next," he said, "but you must also be ready to make choices. Power is not just about strength, it is about responsibility, and sometimes responsibility asks for sacrifices you are not prepared to see." Lyra swallowed hard. She had already faced humiliation, fear, and uncertainty. Could she also face sacrifice? Could she truly accept the weight of her destiny? She wanted to ask, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded, feeling both fear and resolve coil together in her chest. "Come," Kale said, taking her hand once more. "We return to the fortress. There is much to prepare and even more to learn. You are not just an Omega, Lyra. You are part of something greater, something that may change the kingdom forever." As they walked back through the forest, Lyra noticed small details she had not seen before. The way the moonlight shimmered on the leaves, the faint glow of magical creatures hiding among the branches, and the feeling that the forest itself was watching, testing, and acknowledging her presence. She realized that the world was alive in ways she had never imagined, full of mystery, power, and danger. When they returned to the fortress, they were greeted not by celebration, but by silence. The court had been restless in their absence, rumors and fears swirling like a storm. Some nobles were openly resentful of Lyra's closeness to Kale, others curious, but all watched with a mixture of caution and suspicion. The bond between the Alpha King and the Omega was growing, and that alone made them wary. Kale led Lyra to a private chamber, one where they could speak freely. "You did well," he said, finally allowing a small smile. "But this is only the beginning. You must continue to grow, and you must learn to trust not only your strength but your judgment. Others will test you, challenge you, and seek to use you, and you will need every ounce of courage to stand against them." Lyra nodded, her mind still buzzing from the events of the forest. "I understand," she said, though a part of her still trembled, "but I don't know if I can do everything you expect." "You can," Kale said firmly, "and you will, because I will not let you fail. You are my mate, Lyra, not by command, not by obligation, but by choice, and that bond is stronger than anything that can be thrown at us." The words struck her deeply. Mate, choice, bond. She felt the truth of them in her chest, a warmth that chased away the last remnants of fear. And yet, there was still tension, still uncertainty, for the world beyond the fortress walls had not grown kinder. Threats lingered, and whispers of rebellion and dark magic swirled like a storm on the horizon. As she lay in the chamber that night, Lyra could not sleep. Her mind replayed the forest, the battle with the specter, and Kale's words. She realized that her life had changed irrevocably. She was no longer just a timid Omega walking through the festival streets. She was part of a story far larger than herself, one filled with danger, magic, and a connection that defied understanding. And in the quiet of the night, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, along with a thrilling, terrifying sense of destiny. She knew that the challenges ahead would test her, Kale, and the bond they shared. But for the first time she felt ready, not fully, not completely, but enough to face the unknown. Outside the window, shadows moved in the moonlight, silent and watchful. Somewhere beyond the fortress walls, enemies stirred, waiting for the right moment. But Lyra also knew that she was no longer alone. With Kale at her side, guiding her, protecting her, and sharing this bond that neither fully understood yet, she felt that perhaps they could face whatever the world sent against them. And as the first rays of dawn touched the towers of Velorin, Lyra whispered softly to herself, a promise and a warning alike. "I am ready. Whatever comes, I will not falter." The dawn rose over Velorin, painting the city in shades of gold and blood red, as if the sky itself knew of the battles to come. The castle walls stood firm, but beyond them, the rival kingdom's forces gathered. A dark tide of soldiers, mercenaries and creatures enchanted by curses long forgotten. Whispers had spread through the city like wildfire. Lyra, the Omega who had awakened powers, and Kale, the Alpha King, were said to command forces beyond mortal understanding. The enemies came hungry, not just for land but for power, and they believed the disruption of Velorin would be simple. Lyra stood on the balcony of the fortress, her silver-blue eyes reflecting the light of the rising sun. Her gown, though simple, carried a shimmer of magic that she had learned to summon over the weeks of training in the forest. She had grown stronger, more aware of herself, and more confident in the energy that coursed through her. But her heart still beat with nervous anticipation. Today, she would face not only the enemy but her fears, her doubts, and the full weight of her destiny. Kale approached silently, his presence both commanding and reassuring. He stood behind her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, the other gripping the hilt of his sword. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the horizon, calculating and precise. Lyra felt the familiar pull in her chest, the mixture of fear, admiration, and something far deeper that she could not yet name. She had never felt so connected to another human being, yet the bond they shared carried weight beyond the heart. It was something ancient, powerful, and unbreakable. "You are ready," Kale said softly, his voice carrying across her senses. "But remember, strength is not only in what you can do with magic. It is in your courage, your heart, and the choices you make. Today, those choices will matter more than ever." Lyra nodded, though a tremor ran through her hands. "I will not fail," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I will not let them take Velorin or you." Kale's hand squeezed hers, grounding her. "And you will not," he replied. "Not while we are together." The streets below the fortress were already a whirlwind of motion. Soldiers lined the battlements, readying weapons, while messengers carried warnings and commands. The rival army marched in dark banners and shadowed armor, their chants echoing across the plains. But the city itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, as though Velorin had awakened in response to the challenge. Even the air carried magic, thick and alive, waiting to be wielded by those who could command it. Lyra took a deep breath and focused, summoning the energy she had been learning to control. Her heart beat in rhythm with the currents of magic around her, the invisible flow that connected every living thing, every stone, and every whispered secret in the city. She could feel the intentions of the rival army, the fear, the hunger, the hatred, and she used it not with anger but with understanding. The forest had taught her control, patience, and insight. She was no longer the timid Omega who had been mocked at the festival. She was a force in her own right. As the enemy army reached the gates of the fortress, Kale raised his hand. His voice rang out, commanding, deep and unyielding. "Velorin stands united. None shall pass without facing the Alpha King and his mate." A ripple of awe and fear passed through the enemy ranks. Rumors of Lyra's awakening powers had reached even them, and many faltered at the thought of facing not only a king, but an Omega whose magic could strike as sharply as any blade. Yet the army pressed forward, confident in their numbers and their curses, and in the chaos they had planned to sow. The battle began. Arrows flew, clashing against the fortress walls, while spells and magic flared in the skies above. Lyra and Kale moved through the battlefield as one, their bond unspoken but complete. Lyra channeled her magic with precision, sending waves of energy that disrupted the enemy's formations, while Kale fought beside her, his strength unmatched, his strategy brilliant. They moved in rhythm, almost as if guided by some invisible force, each protecting the other, each complementing the other's power. Lyra felt exhilaration and fear in equal measure. The magic that had once frightened her now flowed through her as a shield, a weapon, and a guide. She could sense the enemy's weaknesses, the moments when a strike would succeed, the timing of their moves. And through it all, Kale's presence was steady, commanding, protective, yet full of trust. She realized that the bond between them gave her more than strength. It gave her clarity, courage, and an unshakable determination. Hours passed like moments. The battle raged with intensity, magic and steel clashing, cries of soldiers echoing across the plains. The enemy sought to break through, to strike at the heart of Velorin, but Lyra and Kale were unstoppable. Together, they became more than rulers. They were legends in motion, their power undeniable, their unity inspiring loyalty in their soldiers and fear in their enemies. In the chaos, a familiar shadow emerged. The nobles who had mocked Lyra at the festival had joined the enemy, drawn by greed and fear, believing they could take advantage of the battle to gain favor or power. Lyra's heart twisted at the sight, but she did not hesitate. Her magic flared with a brilliance that stopped them in their tracks, exposing their intentions and rendering their plans useless. The shame, fear, and awe on their faces were a silent victory, a quiet justice for the humiliation she had once endured. Kale's eyes met hers across the battlefield, and in that glance words were unnecessary. They understood each other completely. They were more than Alpha and Omega, they were partners, bonded in heart, mind, and power. Every strike, every surge of magic, every maneuver was a dance of trust and strength. Lyra felt alive in a way she had never known, exhilarated, terrified, and triumphant all at once. As the sun reached its peak, the enemy's forces began to falter. Their leader, a sorcerer of great renown, tried to summon a curse that could shatter the fortress itself. Lyra stepped forward, placing her hands on the ground and feeling the flow of magic beneath her feet, through the city, and into herself. With a deep breath, she channeled the energy she had honed, weaving it with precision, with focus, and with the courage she had discovered within herself. The curse shattered before it could fully form. The sorcerer fell to his knees, stunned and powerless against the bond and strength of the Alpha King and his mate. Lyra's magic pulsed, protective yet commanding, and the enemy army realized they could not prevail. One by one they fled, leaving behind their ambitions, their curses, and their defeat. The battlefield fell silent. The city was safe, the fortress intact, and Velorin stood stronger than ever. Soldiers and citizens alike emerged, cheering, relieved, and in awe of the power they had witnessed. Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted but exhilarated, her hands glowing faintly with residual magic. Kale knelt beside her, placing his hand on her shoulder, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "You have done well," he said, his voice carrying pride and warmth. "Today, you were not an Omega. You were a force of the kingdom, a protector and a partner. And you have proven yourself not to me but to yourself." Lyra's chest rose and fell rapidly. She had faced fear, responsibility, and power she had barely understood, and she had survived. But more than that, she had faced herself, her doubts, and her past, and emerged stronger. She looked at Kale, her heart swelling with gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, a bond that had transformed into love, respect, and unshakable trust. As the celebration began in the fortress, nobles and citizens alike bowing and offering their respects, Kale stood and lifted Lyra's hand. "This woman," he said, his voice echoing across the hall, "is not only my mate but the protector of Velorin. Let all remember that strength comes not from fear, but from courage, heart, and the bonds we forge." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, and even those who had once doubted Lyra bowed deeply, acknowledging her power, her bravery, and her rightful place beside the Alpha King. Lyra felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of belonging and acceptance she had never known. Later, as the night fell and the city settled into quiet celebration, Lyra and Kale stood together on the highest balcony, looking out over Velorin. The moon cast silver light on the towers and streets, and the air was filled with the quiet hum of magic and life. "You have grown," Kale said, his voice soft, almost tender. "Stronger, wiser, and braver than I could have imagined. I am proud of you, Lyra, and I am grateful that you are mine." Lyra felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of relief, joy, and something she could not name. "I could not have done it without you," she said. "You believed in me, even when I did not believe in myself." Kale turned to her, his gaze intense yet gentle. "We believe in each other. That is what makes us strong. That is what makes us unstoppable." Lyra rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The journey had been long, dangerous, and full of uncertainty, but they had survived together. And in that moment, she understood that her life, her destiny, and her heart were irrevocably entwined with the Alpha King, not by fate alone, but by the choices they had made and the bond they had forged. And as the stars shone above, the city safe, and the night quieted, Lyra whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, "This is only the beginning. Whatever comes, we face it together."